Hello again, everybody. I'm Tracy Ackerman, the designer and creator behind KeLibu. I make patterns and accessories for 14 to 20 inch dolls. If you're new here, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you'll always know when I post new content. Today, we're going to be making clothing for our centaurs. If you haven't yet seen my video on how to make yourself a centaur, I'll put the link somewhere up here. This pattern is only available to my newsletter subscribers, so if you're not already subscribed, I'll put a link in the description below. Once you've signed up, the pattern will be sent to you. All right, let's get creating. Before we get started with the vest, I just wanted to talk to you about what you can do if you want to make a shirt for your centaur. I recommend just taking your favorite shirt pattern and altering it to fit. I've used the Janie Carroll Designs Easy Tee shirt here. I love this pattern. It's a great one to have in your arsenal because it does have several different lengths. You can make anything from a t-shirt to a dress with it, and it has different sleeve lengths as well. I've just cut off the hem for the sleeves and the neckline here because I wanted this to have a little bit more of an unfinished look. And I've used a knit fabric that looks like leather. With the back, what you're going to need to do is measure your doll from their neck down to where their body meets the horse's body. Take that measurement, transfer it to the back pieces of your t-shirt pattern, and then cut the pattern so that it goes from that point tapering to the sides. If you are going to hem your shirt, then make sure you add that hem allowance back in, but you want to also make sure that the side seam is still going to be the same length in the back as it is for the front pieces so that it all meets up and looks correct. Okay, let's talk about supplies that you'll need for the vest project. We have two different options for you for the vest. The first is if you'd like to make this style with embellishments going around the perimeter of the vest, then you're going to need one of two things. Either you're going to need, these small little nail head brads. They're probably about 3/16 of an inch wide. Or you're going to need these hot fix rind studs. You can either fix them with a hot fix tool if they've got the glue already on the back, or you can glue them on. Some fabrics aren't conducive to using that hot fix tool on them. It'll melt the fabric, so just test it on a scrap piece before you try it to determine which one you need to use. Whichever one you go with, whether you go with the rind studs or the brads, you're going to need 38 of them. And then you're also going to need 3 sets, or more if you want, of hook and eyes to close the front of the vest up. The second vest option has these leather strap closures in the front, and I've used rivets on mine, so if you'd like to use rivets, then you're going to need 6 rivet caps and their backs. These are decorative rivets, but you could certainly use plain ones as well. If you don't have rivets or you don't want to use them, you could also go with buttons. So these ones are about 5/16 of an inch. I'll have some links in the description below. If you are going to be using rivets, then you're also going to need a rivet setter and a hammer or a mallet in order to set them properly. Let's talk about fabric. One of the vests that I made used this micro suede fabric. It was a different color, but same fabric. It's woven. It's fairly lightweight, so it's easy to work with. I have this fabric, which I just have a tiny little remnant left. It looks like leather, but it's a woven fabric, and again, it's fairly lightweight, so it's easy to work with. And then one of the vests I made out of this medium weight wool. So it's still fairly thin and easy to work with. So as long as you choose something that's not too bulky, you shouldn't have too much trouble. You could also do a cotton if that's all you have. That would be perfectly fine. And then for lining, just go with a cotton, or this is a broadcloth, so it's a poly cotton blend. Just choose something that's going to coordinate with the fabric that you're using. You need about 1/3 of a yard or meter per lining and main, or if you're using remnants, you need a piece of main fabric that's at least 10 inches high by 20 inches wide to get 2 front and 1 back pieces on, and same thing for the lining. Now we've got some general tools that you're going to need for your projects. You're going to need an awl if you're doing any brad or rivet applications. You're going to need the awl to poke holes in your vest. You're going to need some marking tools to mark the placement of where the rivets or brads are going to go. So I have my chalk pen here, or just a regular pen, or any other kind of marking tool that you like. Some hand sewing needles. Some cutting tools. Micro tip scissors are really helpful. This is my little micro rotary cutter with the ergonomic handle. I just love it. Pinking shears or a rotary pinking blade is very helpful for trimming the curves. If you don't have either one of those, you can clip the curves with scissors. That's not a problem. A bodkin or a hemostat is really helpful for helping you turn your vest right side out once you've gotten pieces sewed. And then this is my little secret tool that I use for pushing out corners and things. It's just a bamboo skewer. I use the blunt end to push the corners out, and I like the skewers because they're nice and long, but you could use a small dowel or something like that if that's what you've got on hand. So you'll need to print and cut out your pattern pieces. If you're a newsletter subscriber, you should have already received a link to this pattern. If you're not already subscribed to my newsletter, there'll be a link in the description where you can get signed up, and then it will be automatically sent to you. In addition, you're going to need to punch the holes out. Now, depending on what version you're going to do, if you would like to put brads or hot fix studs all the way around the perimeter, you're going to need to punch all of these holes. I'm going to show you another option to just have 3 bands of leather or vinyl going across the front with rivets or brads or buttons on them. And in that case, you just need to punch out the 2nd, 4th, and 6th holes to mark and not worry about the rest of them. So now we're going to take these, cut out our pattern cut out our fabric, and then we're going to mark them. So for your main outer pieces, you need to cut 2 of the front, 1 reversed, and cut 1 of the back on the fold, and then you need to do the same thing for the lining. Once you've got your pieces cut out of your fabric, you want to make sure to notch your front pieces at this little red mark here. And then if you are making the version that has the embellishment all the way around the perimeter, you need to mark those pieces. I'm just using some chalk. I love this chalk pen. If you would like to get one, I will link in the description where you can pick one up. So just go ahead and mark all those. And now the next piece of prep that you need to do, if you are using brads, you need to actually go ahead and apply all of those right now. So I will just give you a little demonstration of that. You take your awl, poke it through the first hole, and then get one of your brads. You're going to need 38 if you're doing this version. You just poke the brad through, extend the prongs, and try and make sure that they are going vertically, not horizontally. Like that. And just continue around the entire perimeter of your pieces. So you need to do this for the fronts and the back piece. Once you've gotten all your brads applied, an optional step that you can do to keep these prongs from poking is to take some 3/8 inch grosgrain ribbon and just glue it along the back of the brads. Again, this is optional, so you can decide whether or not you want to do it. And just cut pieces off. When you get to the corner, you might need to just cut a smaller piece to go around and then keep going like that. If you are applying rhined studs instead of brads, then go ahead and affix those now. I've just got two different examples here. One is a decorative and one's a plain. So go ahead and hot fix those or glue them depending on your fabric. You might not be able to hot fix them. Just try it out on a little swatch first if you're unsure if it's going to melt your fabric or not. If you're making the version with the leather or vinyl straps going across the front with the rivets or buttons, then you just need to mark the 2nd, 4th, and 6th holes. And because my fabric's light, I'm just using a pen to do this so I can see it. So I've just marked them here, and I flipped the pattern piece over and marked on there. And now we're ready to get sewing. You're going to place your front pieces and your back pieces right sides together and stitch them together at the shoulders with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then once you've done that, you're going to press the seams open like this. So you need to do that for both your main and your lining fabric. Our next step is to pin the lining to the main fabric right sides together. So I've got my lining laying face up right now and my main on the bottom. We're going to pin around the neckline and around each arm's eye. And you need to make sure that when you're pinning things together, you're lining up these shoulder seams so that they're going to match. So I'm going to take this to my machine. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to stitch all the way around the neckline and the arm's eye. I've stitched around my neckline and my arm's eyes, so the next step is we're going to pink these seams to reduce bulk and release the tension on these curves. You can either do that with pinking shears or a pinking rotary blade, or if you don't have either one of those, you can simply make small clips every so often along the seam line just to release some of that tension. So just go ahead and get that done, and I can see my pinking blade is not as sharp as it needs to be, so I'm going to have to go over that again. I have all of my seams pinked, so now we're going to turn the vest right side out. I'm going in through the shoulder seam with my bodkin. You don't have to use a bodkin, but I find it very helpful. Hemostat would also work, anything you've got for turning fabric. So just going to be pulling the front of the vest through the shoulder seam, and depending on the fabric you use, this could be a little bit tight, but just keep at it. There we go. One side turned. Now I'm going to go back through the other shoulder. Okay, so I've got it right side out now, and I'm just going to take this and press along the neckline and the arm's eyes to get this all nice and flat. We've got this all nice and pressed flat now. Our next step is to sew up our side seams. So to do that, we're going to bring this point to this point. We're opening up our main and our lining here on both sides. And then we're going to bring these seams together and match them. Just take your time and make sure you get a really good match there so they line up. Pin it in place. And now you'll see that the backs will go down to this notch that you've cut in the front pieces. So pinning lining to lining along the sides here, and main to main along the sides. What we're going to be doing is stitching all the way along, ending off at the end of where the back pieces end, and that will form our side seam, and we'll do that on the other side as well. I've sewn up the side seams and reinforced at the beginning and the ending of my stitching, and now we just need to reduce some bulk. So I'm going to go and trim these down to about 1/8 of an inch. I'm just using my rotary cutter, but you can use scissors obviously if you prefer. So just made that seam nice and small, and now what I'm going to go do is pull this right side out and just press these seams with the seam allowances towards the back, and then we're ready to move to the next step. I've pressed my side seams with the seams going towards the back of the vest and made sure that everything's going to lie nice and flat. Optionally, you could top stitch around your arm's eyes if you wanted to. I'm not going to with this vest, but that is an option for you. The next thing we have to do is sew up this entire perimeter. If you've done the option with the brads or the hot fix studs going all the way around, you may need to use a zipper foot on your machine. It just depends on how wide your presser foot is, so just test that before you start sewing to make sure that you're not going to be hitting those brads or rind studs while you're sewing. And what we're going to do is sort of turn this inside out a bit again so that we can sew these pieces right sides together. So I'm lining up the front, the center front edge here, and I'm pinning it in place. All along the front here and around the curve. Just take care to make sure that you're lining up the raw edges of your lining with the raw edges of your main fabric. Now, when we get to the bottom and the sides here, oops, we're really kind of flipping this inside out, and it's going to look like a bit of a mess, but that's okay. It's all going to work out. So now I've got this overhanging part on the front side, and I'm going to stitch that together. You need to choose either the right or the left. We're going to be leaving an opening in this straight section here to turn the whole thing right side out when we're done. So it doesn't matter if you choose the left or the right, whichever one you're more comfortable with. And then make sure that you're lining up your corner seams as accurately as you can, so everything looks nice and tidy once you've stitched and turned it right side out. And then we're going to be on to pinning the bottom of the back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep pinning all along here, and then I'll show you what it looks like before I stitch it up. Okay, I've got the whole thing pinned together, and as I said, it looks like a bit of a mess because you've got parts that are sewn inside, so you have to kind of pivot as you're doing this. So I've pinned along all of the edges that are not currently sewn, along the center fronts, up these sides, all along the back, and the same thing on the other side. I'm going to leave my opening on this side, so I'm going to start stitching from the top of center front here, go all along the front, around this curve on the bottom, turn the corner, and then back stitch about where this red pin is, and then I'm going to leave a gap of about 2 inches, and I'm going to start stitching again, back stitching just to reinforce that, and then go the rest of the perimeter. Then I will use this opening to turn the whole thing right side out. So I'm going to go stitch that, and then I will show you what it looks like, and we'll do some clipping of corners and things, and then we'll be ready to turn it right side out. Got the perimeter sewn, and you can see here I've left my opening. The rest of the vest is stitched up along the perimeter. So what we need to do now is go and clip the corners. So center, front, top, just go ahead and do a diagonal clip there. For the front back corner, we're going to do a diagonal cut on each side of the corner. I'm going to go back with my rotary pinking cutter in a minute and just pink the seams along the front and the back here because they are curved. That'll help release the tension, let them lay flat once we've turned this whole thing right side out. But I want to clip those corners first. So now I'm going to go back and pink these, and if you don't have pinking shears or a pinking blade, like I said before, you can just trim the seams down and make some little clips at the curves. Just be sure that you're not cutting through your stitching when you do that. Okay, so you get the idea, and I'm going to do that for the bottom of the back and on the other side as well, and then I'm going to show you how to turn this right side out. One last thing we want to do before we turn is there's going to be a lot of tension at this corner because it's a right angle. So I'm just going to go in and clip along this seam allowance here just up to the stitching to allow it to lay a little bit flatter, and then I didn't quite get in there with my pinking blade, so I'm just going to trim that down a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, making sure that I don't clip through my seam. So I'm just going to bring it up as close to the seam as I can without compromising the seam or clipping through it, and then just take that other little chunk out there. Now we're ready to turn this right side out. I'm going to attempt to do it without using my bodkin, but I might need to employ it. We'll see how easily this turns. So I'm reaching inside and I'm just grabbing the shoulder. So that's the easiest part to hook my finger under. I'm going to pull that out first, and then hopefully that will allow me to keep pulling the rest of the vest out through this little hole in the stitching that I have left. Just going to keep at this. I won't do it on camera because I'm sure it's pretty boring to watch, but I'm going to finish turning it, and then I'm going to press the whole vest, and then we'll hand stitch up the opening. All right, I've got this more or less turned. I just wanted to show you a little trick that I use. I like to use a bamboo skewer because they're nice and long, and use the blunt end to just help me push out any of the corners when I turn this. So you can get a pretty nice sharp corner as long as you've clipped using this bamboo skewer. It's also good for running along the seam on the curves, just to really, oops, sorry, I'm off camera. Running along the seam on the curves just to really push it out. And like I said, I like the skewer because it's nice and long. So with something like this, where we've got an opening on one side and then the vest is quite long, it really helps to be able to get in there with the skewer and push. Don't use the pointy end because that will rip holes in your fabric, won't come through, perhaps wreck your stitching. So just go ahead, make sure all of your corners are pushed out, And then once I've done that, I'm going to take this over to my ironing board and press the whole thing. You might need to just massage these corners a little bit, just wiggle them back and forth to get them to want to lay flat. As I said, there's a lot of tension right there. So just pull gently, wiggle them around a little bit. That'll help get them into position, and then you can press. My vest is all pressed, and I managed to get these corners looking pretty nice. So you have two different options for closing up the hole you left to turn. The first is that you could top stitch all the way around the entire perimeter of the vest, and that would close that hole up. But I feel that top stitching gives it a more refined look, and I want it to be a little more natural looking since it's a centaur. So I'm going to hand stitch it closed. Also, if you did the brads on the outside, top stitching might be a little bit tricky for you. So I came up from the inside, and I'm just going to use a ladder stitch to close this opening. So I'll show you a few stitches. You're basically just taking a small amount of fabric, going through that fold that you've pressed in the lining and the main fabric. And when you use a ladder stitch, very little of your thread is showing, so it's a nearly invisible stitch for closing up openings. This is really hard to do on camera, guys, so sorry. Looking very awkward. But just keep going like that. Close the whole thing up with a ladder stitch or top stitch, and then we'll be on to closures. Got that all stitched up, and as you can see, it's nearly invisible. So I'm just going to put that to the side for a second and show you. If you have made the vest with the hot fix studs or the brads all the way around, you're going to need some closures. So I've just sewn hook and eyes on, and I didn't give you guys placement guides for these because I think it's really up to personal preference how far apart you want to space them and how far down you want to start them, but I would recommend using 3 since the front is a little bit long. And you just put your eyes on the wearer's right and sew your hooks onto the wearer's left, and that way, once they're all attached, you have a way to do up the front of your vest. Okay? If you're doing the other version that doesn't have all the embellishment along the edges, you don't need to add the hook and eyes to it at this point. We're going to add those straps across the front, and those will act as closures. So I've cut my 3 little straps of leather here, and I've taken my pattern piece and punched the holes in it. If you don't like to use the pattern piece to cut these out, you can just use the dimensions. These are 1.5 inches long by 1/2 inch wide. And now I'm just going to mark where we're going to be placing the rivets or buttons and the little holes we're going to make. So these left side markings are going to show us where to install the rivet. And then these right side markings are going to show us where to make a little slit to make a buttonhole. So whether you're using a button or a rivet, you're going to want to make a little slit right there and make sure that your button or rivet is going to fit through that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those. If you're worried about them splitting once they're cut, you can just put a little bit of fray block on the back of your strap, and that will stop it from splitting further. Okay, so I went ahead and got this started off camera because it's a bit fiddly trying to get these rivet backings through the layers, but for my vest, I'm using my awl to poke holes for the rivet backings because I don't want to punch a hole in here and have it possibly fray over time. So using the awl will help just poke the hole up through the fabric and not cause it to fray around the edges. For the leather, I did punch a hole at the place where we're going to be installing a rivet. If you're using buttons rather than rivets, all you need to do is sew a button, put this side of the leather strap down, sew the button on, securing both the leather and the vest to the button, and then on this side simply sew the button, and then you have the opening here as the buttonhole. Because I'm using rivets, I'm going to lay my leather strap over the back side of the rivet there. I'm going to put the cap on, and then I can set that. And then this one, I want to leave this free so that it's open so we can get it all in the doll. So I'm going to put the cap on that side. And then once I have this set, I'll be able to use this like a button to, use the straps to hold it closed. So I'm going to go ahead and set these rivets, and I'm going to put the other ones on exactly like I did this one, and then our vest will be finished. I hope you enjoyed making centaur vests with me today. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and share. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when I post new content. I'm really excited about the videos that I've got planned for you guys. There's going to be some steampunk patterns coming out and a lot of cool accessories and hacks that you could do with those patterns. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, everybody.